Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marty Duckenfield with the National Dropout Prevention Center, and I'm here today for a special edition broadcast of Solutions to the Dropout Crisis. We have a very special co-host and colleague with us today, Rebecca Flood, who has worked with us on a variety of projects at the National Dropout Prevention Center for many years, but especially those related to service learning. We welcome all of you to this monthly radio webcast brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University in partnership with Clemson Radio Productions and with the generous support of Penn Foster. The broadcast today is also co-sponsored by the National Service Learning Partnership. Hey, it's great to have you here, Rebecca, for today's program.
Thanks, Marty. I'm really happy to be here. I'd like to say hello to all of today's listeners. We're going to be spending the next hour with you talking about something that's really important, service learning. We welcome back to those of you who have participated in our previous broadcasts, but we really want to give a special welcome to our new listeners on the program. It's going to be a very exciting program. We have a lot planned for you today, so let's get started. First, I'd like to remind listeners that there are materials provided on the website for today's program. There is the slide presentation, which you'll see at the top of the page. It's a PowerPoint to support today's discussion. So if you could please have that open and ready. We're also, if you go down to the bottom of the page, you're going to see the resource list. There is a document, a PDF, called Service Learning as a Dropout Prevention Strategy. If you could have that open today, ready to go, that would be really helpful. There's a lot of other resources you can see listed on the web page, including a variety of websites that are going to provide you with wonderful information, including that of our co-sponsor, the National Service Learning Partnership. There's a lot of other resources on that website on dropout prevention and service learning. More on those resources later. There's also one of the most wonderful videos I've ever seen. I tear up every time I see it, called Bring Learning to Life. That's available on the web, but you can also order a copy from the National Service Learning Clearinghouse, and you can get a copy for free.
You know, that's a good one, Rebecca. It's only 8 minutes,
yes,
and it really does a great job, so we all strongly recommend that one.
It's a wonderful video. There's also a link to our guest speakers publication from the National Dropout Prevention Center, and that's called Parent Involvement and Service Learning. There are also links to other publications that Kathy has authored through Free Spirit Publishing, including her own ABCD books. It looks like there's a lot of information. A lot of learning is going to be going on today, a lot about service learning and dropout prevention.
Well, you're right, Rebecca. There's an incredible amount of information here, but today's program is really just the first step in learning more about service learning and dropout prevention.
We invite you to be an active part of the program today, so we have 2 ways that you can connect with us. This is a radio call-in show, so we encourage you to call in with questions for the guest speaker. Our toll-free call number is 888-539-8859, and if you're calling outside of the United States, the number is 864-656-4549. You can begin calling anytime during the program, and we invite you to do so. You may be put on hold for a few minutes, but we'll try to get to as many questions as possible during the broadcast.
Well, we're also accepting email questions that are sent to our email address, which is ndpc@clemson.edu. Now, if you put the word solutions in the subject line, I'll be able to spot it right away. And, of course, we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can during the program today. Our topic this month, as you may have noticed, is service learning, one of the 15 effective strategies for dropout prevention supported by the National Dropout Prevention Center. And so joining us today all the way from NPR studios on the campus of Santa Monica College in California is our friend and colleague, Cathryn Kaye from Los Angeles, but really from all over because she's quite a traveler, and she's an ambassador for service learning worldwide. For those of us who are familiar with service learning, Cathy Kaye is really a household name. Her book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning, has provided thousands of educators the tools they need to implement high-quality service learning, and it was the recipient of the National Service Learning Exchange Seal of Excellence Award several years back. Talking with Cathy about books, actually, is one of my favorite activities, and she's introduced me and so many others to all the wonderful books that can enrich the service learning experience. So, today, not only is Kathy going to provide us with a focus on service learning and dropout prevention, but I'm also intrigued about her use of literacy. She's developed a program called Strategies for Success with Literacy, a learning curriculum that serves. And this curriculum actually, which incorporates service learning, has been used with over 40,000 students in the Los Angeles Unified School District as part of their dropout prevention plan. So we welcome you to Solutions, Kathy.
Thank you, Marty and Rebecca. It's wonderful to be here and with all your audience. Thank you.
Yeah, today's program does look like to be a very special one. And so I know, Rebecca, aren't we ready to get started?
We sure are.
Okay, so we do want to remind everyone to call us with your questions, and that number again is toll-free, 888-539-8859. And if you're calling outside the U.S., and I wouldn't be surprised, Rebecca, if today's the day that might happen. Kathy's a worldwide traveler. It's 864-656-4549. So let's hope we hear from some of your international friends. But, Kathy, let's turn to that PowerPoint now. I think everybody's probably got it up and ready to go and learn more about this new perspective that you'll be sharing with us today.
Thanks, Marty. Let's start with the first slide that says words of wisdom. Many of you know when I present or do keynotes, I love to start with quotes. It's just kind of like my trademark. So I have two for you today. One is, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. And this holds true for educators. And it also holds true to make that part of how young people see themselves as change agents and young people who can have influence over their own surroundings, their school, their community, and indeed their world. And also there's this concept for some kids is that, what can I do? I'm only a kid. But what I want to remind all of us is that fabulous quote by Anita Roddick, who is the founder of the Body Shop. She said, if you think you are too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito. So we can see that everyone can be someone of influence, and every person has the capabilities, indeed the skills and talents, to do something of meaning. One of the reasons I start with words can be seen on the next slide that says words on the top, because words are what we have to use with students every day. This is the tool we bring. We bring words. We use them to inspire, to enliven, to transform, to inform, to take us places, to mystify us, to provide ideas, examples, and hope. Indeed, our role as educators is to elevate how young people also use words. However, I think we can all agree that in spite of our best efforts, students use words on occasion, I think all too often, as weapons to hurt and wound other kids because they don't really understand the ramifications of these actions. What we want to do is what's on the next slide. We want to help young people understand that words matter. They move us in one direction or another, and that we want the words to move towards ideas and to action, and that's the heart of what we're going to do with service learning. So if any of your listeners are interested, we will also post on this website my top 50 quotes that I use all the time. And in my Strategies for Success with Literacy program that Marty referenced earlier, students learned a great deal about quotes, and they use those directly as service learning on their school campus. So let me explain how on the next slide that says quote art. The students had an understanding of quotes, and when you study quotes, you'll see there's metaphors, there's all kinds of short writing brevity, how you get across a deep meaning. You can use them to really have kids investigate all kinds of issues and concepts. They took the quotes and then they took a school tour. Now, students walk around their school all the time, but taking a tour is different. They're now looking at the site. They're seeing what are the needs in our school and who are the people that make this place work that I may not notice, I may not greet. They get to know people, and this begins to change the school community and the culture as students start to recognize every person is a person of value that I'm in touch with. They research quotes for different locations. Confidence is contagious, so is lack of confidence. It's a place they decided to put that one by the gym, since that was spoken by Vince Lombardi, the coach. I find television very educational. The minute someone turns it on, I go to the library and get a book, a little Groucho Marx humor there. They stuck on the library door so that every time students entered a space, they had a quote to lift them up, to get them excited. Students in New York took this idea, and they made a scavenger hunt for students. So students were constantly in search of uplifting words to get them off on the right foot each day. And other students at another school took this idea, and they made a CD screensaver of art, of the quote art that they did in computer class, and gave every teacher on their campus a CD with this, the quote art as a thank you for our school, for teaching at our school. And schools have uploaded those on their websites. Quotes are just a great launch pad for kids thinking about deep thoughts and then transforming them into acts of service for others. So it's one way I'd like to get started as we're looking at this whole process. The next slide will just outline for you what we'll be discussing today. The overall questions is, what is service learning? How does service learning work? And how do we meet the needs of kids who question the value of school? Because that's obviously part of why students leave, is they're not as adhered to this institution for their own purpose and value as we'd like them to be. So as we go into the next part of this presentation, please note we'll be using the slides and also the handouts that Rebecca referred also that were provided on the website as a PDF. Now, Marty and Rebecca, I'm going to start with a question for you two. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. So what skills do you think students need to be successful learners? What do you think would really get them on the right track?
Well, just based on my experience as both a parent and a teacher, I think one of the biggest things I've seen is the need to be organized.
Absolutely. Students need to be organized, and this requires a multiple range of skills. It means they need to be resourceful. They need to learn how to gather and manage information, and also to sift and sort what's important, which means summarizing and actually taking notes, both mental notes and visual notes. Rebecca, what skill do you think would be critical for students?
I think active learning is also important.
Active learning, absolutely. And that involves the ability to listen clearly and to then translate that listening into something that matters. If you look at the next slide, you'll see my list, and it's also on your PDF handout. What skills do students need to be successful learners? Always at the top of my list is the ability to ask questions. It's already December, and I bet some of my listeners out there can think of students who've not asked a single question in school this semester so far. And I believe you need to ask questions in order to be an active learner. That really gets our curiosity going and means that we're in a safe environment to be inquisitive, to be curious, and that's really a hallmark of a good learner. So one of my tips for you out there is, one way to get students to ask questions is to do what I call the 1-minute think tank. Have them turn to a partner. You give them a challenge. You say, let's say you're teaching about the Civil War. You might say, turn to the partner next to you and come up with a question about the Civil War. That alleviates that pressure that I have to do it alone. It alleviates the fear I'm going to be embarrassed. And suddenly, with a little practice, that's what's key to these skills. Students need to practice them. They become part of their ability to ask questions, to listen and retain. And this entire list that you can glance through are some of the key aspects I think are so important that when I developed my Strategies for Success with Literacy program, this was the hallmark. These are the skills I think students absolutely need to know. These are the transferable skills that students need in order to have literacy abilities. Now, most often, as you'll see on the next slide, called literacy, that students, that we as educators define literacy as the ability to read, write, and comprehend, and to do so with a kind of fluency. However, as you'll see on this slide, that's only one half the picture. That does not include the function or the purpose. When I work with students and with teachers, we look at what is the reason that we develop these skills of reading, writing, and comprehending, which our brain researchers tell us is difficult for us to really manage. And one aspect is we want students to have civic literacy so they can participate. They can go beyond just kind of riding the wave of life, but to be active participants so they can recognize a need and have the skills and knowledge of what to do about it. In our ever-changing and ever, small, shrinking world, we need cultural literacy so that we can appreciate people who are similar and different and recognize the different ways people think and bring their backgrounds to bear on our communities. We need social literacy so students know how to interact appropriately with different populations. In fact, I'm reminded about a teenager who once told me his parents taught him that when you enter a social situation, you start with the elders first and work your way down to the youngest. And I think we used to do that growing up. I grew up in the South in Texas, and we always greeted our elders first, and then we would go off to be with others. There's certain kinds of courtesies that students can learn, and service learning avails students of interweaving all of these forms of literacy with the basics of learning so that they really, all of this congeals. Now, what other kind of literacy, that's that blank, fill in the blank, what other kind of literacy do you think would be important in today's society, in today's world?
Kathy, I think environmental literacy is really important.
Absolutely. In fact, my next book is going to be all on that, called Going Blue. So it's very important that we have environmental literacy. We also need to have technology literacy, media literacy, emotional literacy. If a kid loves basketball, they need sports literacy. When we started hearing the form and function together in our learning environments, then we do what I call answer the why. Now, I bet if you think about it, if you're all like me, how many of you listeners out there would confess that you used to look out the window when you were in school and wonder, why am I learning this? Well, I bet many of us as teachers still look out the window and wonder, why am I teaching this? We need to remove the why for the students and for the teachers. We want to bridge the form and function with a sense of purpose, and this is extremely important. And this is really a very strong basis of my work with my strategies program that weaves together high-level literacy skills with social-emotional development and service learning.
Well, this is a key thing, I think. We just want to reinforce this point here. When we're looking at dropout prevention and risk factors, and that whole relevance issue and why am I here and what's the meaning and what's the purpose is huge. And I think I just wanted to reinforce that point from our perspective in dropout prevention, Kathy.
Marty, I absolutely agree. And one of the stories that always comes to mind is from Miami. I've had great opportunities to work with educators in the Miami-Dade School District. And I met one educator who said he had students who'd been living in Miami area from Haiti for a couple of years. And as part of their literacy and language skill development, he arranged for them to go tutor more recent immigrants in English. And the kids did not want to do this. This was not even socially acceptable among their peers, that they would go help other people who are more recent immigrants. But the teacher said, this is how we teach, this is how we learn in our classroom, because he was very committed to service learning. The students went and had their first encounter with their now tutees, and they came back completely agitated, and the teacher really didn't know what was going on. They said, we need to understand better our lessons so we can go teach them. And they wanted to know more about grammar and more about vocabulary. They were so committed to helping these students once they met them and they realized, I have something to offer. What I'm learning matters. And this was really transformative as a means of getting kids to really connect purpose to learning and create that, as you said, relevance. And I even saw in the program in Los Angeles, this is a research-based program, but especially some of the anecdotal evidence showed that the risk factors we're aiming to mitigate were really addressed. Students who have these kind of skills and these kind of experience have increased attendance, which is obviously very important in our schools, decreased referrals to the office. In fact, some schools said they were down to 0 referrals to the office for the students who attended this program, and increased leadership. All factors that I think will work to our benefit as we aim to reduce the dropout problem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are the indicators that we measure to see if things are being effective or what the issue is in our schools. So you're hitting the nail on the head with this, Kathy.
Well, I see it happening, and I think we can do more, and we can do this effectively. Now, if we look directly at the next slide, you see that word I love, service. It's even got a little heart to dot the I, because when we think of the heart, it connects with our emotions, and because we do service most often because we care. Now, the problem is you can care from your couch. We want to get the off-the-couch kind of caring that you see in the Thomas Alva Edison quote on the next slide that says, I never perfected an invention that I did not think about in terms of the service I might give others. I find out what the world needs, and then I proceed to invent. Now, as teachers, if we looked at our mission as a teacher, and we just changed Edison's words just slightly and said, I never perfected a lesson plan I didn't think about in terms of the service we might give others. We find out what our community needs, then we proceed to teach and to learn. I bet once a year we could do that, and I would even hazard a guess that we could do this 2 times a year, that twice, once each semester, maybe during that semester, we could create this, what's now being called a semester of service, woven into our classrooms so that we commit to being action-oriented in how we're teaching. Now, the word learning on the next slide has what's meant to be a crown sitting on top of that I. And I use the symbol crown because if you put a crown on your head, it elevates you. You feel powerful, you feel important, and you know that what you're doing as a learner has meaning and has purpose. And the only problem is, though, I bet many of us could confess that even in the best of circumstances, learning can go in one ear and out the other. So how do we find that glue? Educator Ralph Tyler said it best on the next slide when he said, learning is like fish. If you don't use it, it won't keep. What we find with service learning is students learn. They use it, they keep it, and that retention goes up. We're creating memorable experiences for students. So as you see on the next slide, what you have here is the cognitive and affective coming together, that heart-mind connection. And brain researchers tell us that all the way through adolescence, which goes now up to age 25, information comes in through our emotions to our intelligence, emotions to our thought processes. So if we know that, that means that if students care about their learning, they will want to learn it. And I think those of us who can think back of the times that learning mattered most to us individually growing up, it's when we really cared about the subject matter and suddenly learning came to life. Now, I confess I did not originate some of these thoughts. I'd say Aristotle caught this one a few years ago, as you'll see on the next slide, when he said, education of the mind without education of the heart is no education at all. I could go along with that. How about you, Marty?
Oh, absolutely. I've been thinking about this issue ever since I started this odyssey in service learning and dropout prevention. And this is how we always begin our conversations with teachers, and we're all remembering things from the past that we learned, and it wasn't that spelling test or that lecture on this and that, although there's some powerful lectures you can remember, but it's those experiences that captured our hearts and our minds, and everybody, that's the memory they have, and that's what sticks.
Absolutely. And we can create those, and that's what makes teaching come just off the page and out of the book and out of the classroom even, where all those pieces that are so critical. The book learning is important. The teaching, the demonstration from the teacher is important, but we need to now move it into action. So let's look at the next slide and take probably the most dominant service experience in America, especially this time of year, the classic canned food drive. Now, as community service, we know that all too often it looks like food being collected, very often in the form of a competition among classrooms, and it can equal a pizza party. One class wins a prize. Now, if one class wins, we know the rest lose. In fact, some kids won't even bother bringing things in because they know their class won't win. And very often it means that kids are bringing in anything. They're not connecting this with background information, so they may bring in food they don't care about, the things that are old in the cupboard, the things without labels on them. Instead, as service learning, what we look at is, in these slides here, these pictures, we see someone who works in a food bank, that students interact with the food bank and find out what is needed in the food bank that year. And this is very important. Connecting with community partners is extremely important in the service learning process. The second picture there shows a slide about food security. That's how the U.S. government measures or does somewhat of a census on hunger in America. Is food, do people know where their next meal is coming from? That's called food security or food insecurity, and using literature. Now, when you see this slide here, you see that students are not just learning from one medium, and that's what's so exciting about service learning. They're interacting with real people in the community. They're doing research and tying in facts and figures and statistics. They're learning from fiction and nonfiction books. So the picture of learning becomes just larger. And they're also dealing with these underlying issues. In the first example of community service, they may not even be dealing or thinking about the issues of real people facing real hardships in their lives right now. But in the second version, the service learning version, they are. They're learning about the underlying issues of poverty, hunger, and even homelessness in the community. Now, what we always want to do with service learning is, even if the service is going to be local, we can expand our students' minds by adding a global component. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, a mind that is stretched by new ideas can never go back to its original dimensions. So let's look at the next slide and do a little mind expansion. When we think about hunger, we can look at these kinds of statistics. How many people in the world do you think go to bed hungry every day? Anybody out there? Marty, you want to take a guess, or Rebecca?
Why are you doing this to me and putting me on the spot? I don't want to answer it. Rebecca, you take a shot at it.
I don't know, a couple million? 5 million maybe?
Okay, the 5 million looks like it would be a reasonable response, but I'm going to be very honest and tell you all three answers are wrong. The answer today, as of this summer, is 1 billion people. Every day, that's 1 in 6 people in the world go to bed hungry. Now, if you know that, it's very hard to equate a food drive with a pizza party. If you know that 50% or 3 billion people live on less than $2 a day, that makes someone, all of us, say, well, I can do something. I can be helpful. I can be someone who takes my talents and my abilities and put them into action. And this is important with service learning. Now, in West Hollywood, California, if you look at the next slide, this is an example of students who are attending an alternative high school, how they get involved. They were asked by the city, their actual city of West Hollywood came to be the lead in this experience, and they went to the students at the alternative school and said, we need your help. Now, years ago, that was one of the hallmarks that they found. Students weren't volunteering because no one was asking them to. No one was telling them, we need your help. So the city went to the kids at the school and said, we need your help. And out of 100 kids, about 50 kids volunteered to be helpers, to follow through and connect with their curriculum and learn about what was going on in hunger in the community. First thing they did was they visited their food bank. They saw the need firsthand. A PR consultant volunteered time from the city and worked with the students, and they designed this fabulous logo you can see there, Gotta Feed 'Em All. This logo is still being used years later that the students designed. They involved all grades in their community. They created banners. They created media campaigns for their community. These are high school students doing this, leading the way. And then one of the students said, wait a second, what we found out is the food bank is empty in the spring. Everybody's doing food drives in the fall. And so now they held their food drive in April, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. They also decided that there was going to be a community cookbook that was going to be all about health, and they volunteered to be tasters. These were kids who otherwise had been seen as the outcasts, seen as kids who were not participants, who were not assets to the community, and they redefined themselves by becoming full assets and full participants by creating a food campaign, working in the food bank, and finding long-term solutions to issues. This food campaign's been going on for years now, all with their input and with the students leading the way. So this is an example of what students can do that goes above and beyond, let's just put a can in a box. And I bet all of you can think all the learning that's going on here with the writing and the conceptual thinking and the organization that needs to happen to bring this to life.
And this is a great time to just take a little pause here to absorb all this right now. I mean, I'm listening to that, and so many schools, you're right, do canned food drives, especially this time of year. Here we are, it's the holidays, and it's everywhere. And the needs this year are greater than they've been in a very, very long time. But I think what you're showing here, Kathy, and we're hoping that our listeners can see this, that you can build on something that's already going on and really enhance it tremendously in the learning in every subject area. I think I defy anyone to not be able to make a connection to their curriculum with the variety of things that could be done based on something that starts as simple as this collection of food. So this is a terrific example, and I do want to take this moment also to invite our listeners to feel free to give us a call so you can have a question for Kathy, and that toll-free number is 888-539-8859, and if you are one of the international listeners, you can call us at 864-656-4549, and of course we have our email up and ready, ndpc@clemson.edu. So give us a call and we will try to get to you when we see that the boards light up. Okay, Kathy, ready to move on, or did you have another comment about this?
Well, I absolutely agree, Marty, that what we are looking here is, in one way to get started, is, as you just said, you take what you already have going on at your school and then you elevate it through the process of service learning. Now, on the next slide, you're going to see the K-12 service learning standards. Now, these have been developed with the guidance of NYLC, the National Youth Leadership Council, and they're listed on our resource list. If you'd like to know more about these standards, please visit their website at nylc.org. And you'll see that there's 8 standards, and one of them that's bright blue, or meant to be bright blue, says linking to curriculum. So exactly what you said, Marty, we can take that food drive, and now we can say, well, how could we link it to the curriculum? So let's look at the next slide, and you'll see, and you also have this document in your handout so that you can use this with your faculty. You see that in the middle you have a service theme. The theme could be, for example, poverty, hunger, and a food drive. And then you could sit with faculty in small groups, small teams, and decide, well, how could you tie that to the different curricular areas? If you were teaching, let's say, about history, you could easily tie the food drive today to the potato famine in the past, or to the droughts that went on in America during the Great Depression. If you're doing math, you can look at some of the statistical issues in your community. If you're looking at physical education, you can look at the difficulty and challenges one has of to do phys ed if one is not given the proper nutrition, and so you could tie it to a nutrition lesson that leads over to science. So as a team, you can brainstorm ideas. So this idea of a food drive weds right directly to the curriculum. Now, the next slide, you'll see an example of this with notes already written out for you, so you can use this. So, for example, with math, you can use this to read food labels and discuss percentages of what is nutritious. In English and language arts, you can find examples in literature or in newspapers of stories of people who are living on the edge or having difficulty with making ends meet. So what we want to do is develop this as a curricular experience, and that's the hallmark of service learning. It's not an add-on. We weave it right deeply into the curriculum, so it improves how we learn and how students think about the interconnections of their academic experience. These are all very important, and it's what gives something meaning, as you'll see on the next slide. Now, when we work with students, particularly trying to keep kids in school, they're looking for something that has meaning. Some of the research I've read said that one of the main reasons students drop out has to do with boredom and lack of relevance for them. So what we can do with service learning is create that sense of personalization, that I am involved, that there's something that matters to me, that there's a sense of ownership. I saw with those students in West Hollywood, they were allowed to share ideas. They were taken seriously, and that's what kids want. They want when that alarm clock goes off in the morning, they want to jump out of bed because they know they've got something to do that matters. That's the relevance piece. And they like to know that what they're doing counts for something. It's not just a paper that was written that sits in a file cabinet, but that paper accompanies a presentation to a city council or to a school board to convince others that by replacing light bulbs, you can save the school district money, and that these are things kids can really do. When they see demonstrable outcomes, they're not glad something's done. They want to say, well, what's next? Because they really appreciate this kinds of learning, because there are aspects of fun in it, because they get to have a challenge. I think even more than fun, kids actually want a challenge. They want to be tested. They want to see who they are. They want to come up against something challenging and see that they can do well. And this, again, you see the bookmarks are personalization on both ends, that kids do need to have things connected. Now, this is true for all students. However, when students feel disenfranchised or disconnected, these become ever more essential.
I'm going to refer to something that we've developed over time in a publication we did, Rebecca and I and our colleague Sam Drew, which is on resilience and the factors of resilience. I'm looking at this and seeing this absolutely backs up what we were mentioning there, and this whole idea of relationships and independence and creativity. And help me, Rebecca, what's the other C? And optimism. But it's all embedded in here. These outcomes, these meaning to the learning makes a difference, and especially students who have been, as you've said, disenfranchised. They want to be creative. They want to have ownership, but no one's ever asked them these opportunities before.
And they have tremendous abilities. A lot of these kids have great street smarts. They know how things happen. They know how to get things done. But someone's never asked them, well, what can you do? And that becomes really critical as you enter the 5 stages of service learning. That becomes an essential component, as you'll see on the next slide, of getting kids understanding that what they bring to the table is extremely important, and that what we're doing as educators is bringing them forth. Education comes from the Latin root educare, which means to bring forth. If we only are doing instruction, which means to put in, we're missing the boat here. We also need to do education to bring them out, so that as they come out, they see that they are people of value, of merit, and they have a great deal to contribute in their society. And they don't have to wait to be 21 or 25 or 35 to do it, that they can do it at 8 and 12 and 16, and that's the message we need, and that as we provide them this. And as we all know, service is a key word in our government, in our country right now, and we're really elevating that to something that every person is being called upon to do and to contribute. Now, as we look at the 5 stages of service learning, we've got investigation, preparation and planning, action, reflection, and demonstration. And these are stages that you can follow, so that this is what the students go through. They investigate, they prepare and plan, they take action, they reflect, and they demonstrate, all with the guidance of the teacher. And the role of the teacher remains ever important. Though I must confess, we must let go of some of our controls now to do service learning. Now, this is something that I know can test some of us, I put myself right in there. Sometimes in my workshops, I'll ask how many teachers would like to confess that they are control freaks, and probably everybody raises their hands. We all like to have control of our classroom and what happens. What's exciting with service learning is we get to lighten up on that a bit. We get to give students more and more voice and choice of what happens, and we see that their ideas are just exceptional and really do create a better pathway for learning for all young people. The first stage of investigation is so critical, and that's where it's two parts. The first part is we do investigation of the students themselves. Now, that's really fabulous, because what we want students to do is learn who they are in relationship to others and to really expose their interests, skills, and talents. So I provided also all the listeners on the PDF with a handout that's called Personal Inventory. Now, this might look like a form that you give a student to fill out, but I'd like to advise you it really is not. It's really meant to be an interview process. So, for example, Marty, you would interview Rebecca about what her interests are, what she likes to learn and think about, what skills she brings to the table, when's the time she's helped someone, and when's the time someone has helped her. And those two last questions help build that sense of reciprocity, that we're always on either end of that stand, that we're not one or the other. There are times we help others and times we're helped by others. Most critical, especially for kids who feel that they're of less value, is this whole part about interests and skills and talents. When I ask many kids in America, what are you interested in? What are your skills and talents? Unfortunately, do you know what the answer is?
Oh, what could it be?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know. You're right.
Oh, is that what it is? I don't know. Yeah.
It actually is.
And what could it be was actually an answer.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't know or nothing. And this breaks my heart. I have to be real honest with you. Because every student has got skills and talents. But what we've done, starting probably from 3rd or 4th grade, is start saying, look, it's time to get down to work. We don't have time for your stories. They don't have time to hear about this and hear about that. And what happens is the kids get marginalized. They start depressing or pressing down their stories they want to tell, their aspects of themselves. And we make it worse by saying, if you talk about yourself, it's called bragging. So we've really messed this up. So what we get to do now through service learning and through this personal inventory is bring back the skill sets that students need and make them explicit. So as students interview each other, I like to suggest to my listeners here that you prepare them. You prepare them, have them practice active listening before they do this, have them practice note-taking before they do this, and review with them the importance of asking questions. That you can ask general questions and you can also ask probing questions. So if someone says, I like music, you come back with, well, what kind of music do you like? So they learn these skill sets. And also you review with them the necessity. It's very necessary to say, what if somebody says, I don't know? And we say, well, and then you'd have a class discussion that everybody is something of value, so that every student is challenged and even encouraged, and it's modeled to think about, what do I bring to the table? So this part becomes actually easy as they go through this. And then the teacher takes this list that the students have assembled and put it up on the wall of the interests and the skills and talents, and you call upon those as you go through the service learning process. Very important. Now, the second piece of investigation is community need. Now, Marty, I asked you this yesterday when we were having a chat. I said, Marty, if a teacher assigns a research paper, what's the most common question a student might ask?
I don't remember this
Marty! You said how long does it have to be?
Oh, yeah, I did say that, yes.
How many pages?
I did say that. I'm sorry, listeners. How many pages? No kidding. How many words? In fact, hey, I do publications for the center, and that's the first question I get from authors is, how many words, how many pages do I
think it's left over.
Yeah, and actually they want to have more because they're authors, but it's the same question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the same question. With students, they want less. They want to say, what can I get away with? What's the minimum? Because they feel insecure and they don't feel confident in their writing skills, or in their research skills. Because all too often, you give a student a research project or something to research, they equate. If I could have a blackboard here, I would write research equals Google. They think only way you do research is you go back to a computer in the library at home and you Google, and that's how you find out what's going on. We know that's really quite insufficient. So I provided you with two documents that are both part of my gathering information about a community needs set. And these are from my curriculum, my strategies for success, and also from my workbooks that I've developed for Free Spirit Publishing, my How to Take Action series for kids. Those are also to be found in those publications. And what this does is it challenges students and challenges teachers to remember there's different ways to do research. So if we just kept with the theme of, if we were saying we wanted to find out about hunger in our community, what I would do is have my students divide into 4 groups. And I would have one group say, how could you use media to learn more about hunger? And media, of course, includes internet, but it goes beyond. It includes television and radio and newspapers and books. I'd say to another group, how could you use observation and experience? How do you draw on our past or what we could go do as a group to learn more about hunger? Who could we survey? Who could we interview? And as students start thinking this way, the last thing they're going to want to do is Google, because, man, I'd much rather go and interview someone at a food bank than sit at a computer typing in words and reading things off and copying things down. That's not how we learn best. It's through action. So they find out that they can really interview, for example, a newspaper reporter who's been covering this. They can go visit a food bank, or they might take a photo essay of some of the symbols of hunger in their community, so they start creating a visual map of what's going on. And students get excited to do research, and this is, again, a transferable skill. So if a teacher gives them an assignment about in science about nutrition, they might, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to Google it, who could I interview? Who could I survey? What could I observe? And this then transforms kids into active learners. And this is what we're seeking, to really build that student who doesn't have any sense of confidence into someone who says, I can learn. I'm an effective learner. And this is part of what we need to do to adhere them to our institutions of school.
You know, this is one of the most exciting components of service learning that I think a lot of people don't realize even exists, because they'll have an idea of a good service project and go from there rather than having students get engaged in looking what are the problems locally and who is involved and what are the issues, and going out there and actually face-to-face finding it. This is fun stuff. Just think of the learning in this. It's just amazing, and it's been always been one of my favorite parts of service learning. I don't know why, but it is.
Well, you know, I remember once working with a group in Colorado, and there were some students and teachers together, and they were planning. However, the teachers took over, I must confess. And so in this one group of about 8 people, there were about 3 teachers and 5 kids. When I walked by to see how the group was going, all I heard were voices from teachers. And fall was coming up, and the teacher said, I think the teachers were already planning. They weren't even asking the kids. They said, we're going to do a tree planting this October, end of October. And the kids are sitting there. They looked as numb and bored as you could ever imagine. Right. And I turned to the kids. I said, does anyone have an idea about this? And one kid piped up and says, I don't want to plant trees in October. It's cold outside. October's about Halloween. I want to go put on a Halloween party for people who live in a convalescent facility. Now, which would you rather do? I mean, the teachers were just on one track. They weren't even asking the kids, what is the need? And obviously what that would lead to is then the kids going and calling and interviewing people at a facility saying, would this be appropriate, or how could we work this out? And all the skills that come into play with even learning how to make a proper phone call. My gosh, how many kids really know how to call someone and have a proper phone call? So all the skills that kids would do to actually follow up on their idea is what we're looking for. Investigation is a paramount importance when we do service learning, and so I always like to really make sure that message comes home. The next slide summarizes it, where you have investigation all on one page, just to bring that back. Investigation in my methodology is 2 parts. We inventory students, we gather information about a community need, and then we jump into the preparation and planning. And teachers, this is where your academics come into play, all the academics, because I bet you're wondering, well, how am I going to teach my math classes, and how am I going to teach my social studies, or we need to read these essays or these books, or I need to give 3 tests. All that happens as you're preparing and planning. All that happens as the kids are gaining the knowledge they need so that they can go in a well-formed manner to develop a plan of action that they then do, which is on your next slide. You see that there's...
Kathy,
yes.
we've had an email question that kind of relates to this.
Great.
And so it's from our friend up in Minnesota, Rob Schumer, and he says...
Hey, Rob.
Well, he's online. He's not on the phone. How do you get the time for secondary level teachers to talk to each other about the themes so they can coordinate their classes and integrate subject areas into the service experience? So we're at that point right now, I think, in the discussion, so maybe you can address Rob's issue right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Rob, you've hit on a very important question here. Part of it is, if service, if we back this up to look at a school mission statement, most school mission statements are about creating active citizens for the future and for our communities today and in the future. So that means that administration would need then to create time to allow this to happen, which means that administration would ideally support time, planning time for teachers, whether that's during a faculty, all faculty meeting where there's time apportioned out, whether that's in staff development time that's allocated, whether it's in a department time, whether for some teachers it's at the lunchroom cafeteria where teachers say, look, let's just get together and hash out these ideas. But it's imperative that teachers do get time, ideally, supported by the school administration, to do the kind of planning and thinking through that's necessary. And people often also ask, well, if teachers do so much planning, where's room for youth voice? A well-planned service learning experience will always have opportunities for students to shape, to reshape, to add their voice to it, even when a teacher has etched out a pretty clear framework. Because in many high-level academic classes in secondary level, there are academic measures and benchmarks that must be met, the teacher may have a little reluctance to embark on this journey. But what I have found is that I remember an AP teacher in Wisconsin taught English. He said, how would my students ever pass the AP exam except for service learning? Doing service learning gives them a story to tell, gives them something to do. We have examples from High Tech High in San Diego where humanities teachers partnered with biology teachers. Now, I'd have to ask them, Rob, what time they got for their planning, but they did. And the students made a multimedia platform campaign about water solutions for their community. So teachers will need to be creative if the administration is not allowing or are carving out time. But I think you're right. We need time to plan with others, especially in high school, because very often we're still doing a silo type effect, and we want to merge some of these academic areas.
Oh, absolutely. And Kathy, we do have a caller from John in Arkansas. So, John, do you have a question for Kathy?
Hello, how are you?
Great, John. Good to hear from you.
Thanks. Kathy, I do have a question. In fact, it really sort of follows up on Rob Schumer's question, actually. And that is, this sounds really, really good, but there are a couple of issues that would seem to me that my teachers would suggest that there would be problems, and that is, how do I have time to do this with regard to the requirements of the standards that I have a rigid curriculum that I have to follow, and how does this fit in with those standards? Also, the assessment piece. There's some issues with regard to assessing students. So how would you address that?
I absolutely will. Now, in your handouts, you've got a planning tool. It's a 2-page planning tool that's from my book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning. And what you see if you have that up on your screen or you've printed that out is on that kind of guiding visual map of service learning, it says what are the curricular connections you want to make. It's very important that you itemize what the standards are that you want to reach. Service learning is, again, not an add-on. We don't stop our academics. We say, well, I want my students to become better writers, for example. So they started creating this media campaign in San Diego addressing issues of water, because they also needed to do water testing in a biology class. So you partnered biology with the water with the writing standards the kids needed to meet. This is all meant to really measure the academic standards, to meet them, and to do this effectively. Now, a couple of resources I'd like to mention. One is Florida Learn and Serve is one of the leaders in the country on service learning, and they've taken every one of their Florida Sunshine State standards, which I'm sure are very similar to yours, John, in your state, and they've shown how you can meet those through service learning experiences. So, and then in terms of assessment, if students end up writing a newspaper article for a local paper about the work they did in a wetland restoration project, a teacher could assess whether they wrote that article clearly and give them a grade, much like you could grade any other experience. What's exciting about service learning, though, is it affords students to do progress monitoring, so they see what progress are we making in the community. It also affords them to do self-assessment, so they can say, well, I've learned this, because what we hope to do through service learning is make the learning transparent. That metacognitive piece. So students say, I learned by doing interviews. I've gotten much better at asking questions. I've learned by talking to 3 reporters. I've learned by reading these essays. I've learned by reading this novel, and so forth.
Well, Kathy, that sounds great, but it would seem to me that you started on a service learning project that there would need to be, based on what you just said, there would need to be some significant teacher training development in service with regard to the kinds of issues you just addressed. So,
well,
it doesn't
John,
seem
you're
to
right.
be something
Yeah.
you could pick up and just do tomorrow. Doesn't it seem
Well,
as easy as you make it seem?
Well, I'm gonna agree and gently disagree both with you, if I can do both. First of all, we all know that any time a new teaching pedagogy is introduced, staff development is of paramount importance. However, I've been very fortunate that my publisher has been a great supporter of my work, and I produced the book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning, and I get emails constantly, and I do mean this constantly, from teachers who say, I picked up your book, now I understand service learning, and I've been doing, and they start rattling off what they've been doing. So I'm very glad that you called about this, so that if you're really interested, pick up a copy of my book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning. You can go to my publisher's website, freespirit.com, and look at their great resources. And you will get from this book and from many of the resources listed on the website for this radio webcast, there are resources from many of the organizations that can help. And one other website I'd like to mention is a brand new one that I helped develop. It's called GoToServiceLearning.org. And these have 12 lesson plans right now. There'll be more coming up on Martin Luther King Day. 12 lesson plans clearly articulated that show how a teacher can move through the 5 stages of service learning. And they're examples from real teachers who've done them. And you'll see that some of them look really quite very easy to implement and to weave in. There's also other resources. I'd like to mention the National Service Learning Clearinghouse. If you go there, that's servicelearning.org, has SLICE, and that's an accumulation of many lesson plans. So while it can seem daunting to get started with something new, there are so many good resources and examples. And what I've learned is teachers are creative. They really get it. And they can understand that rather than just learning, hypothetically about plants, you could actually plant a garden and help grow food that then helps a food bank. So teachers will pick up on this more easily than we might imagine. And I hope that you'll follow up with me. My email is...
I'm going to have to interrupt.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, John. Yeah, appreciate you calling in, because we have another caller, and then we're going to get back onto the program. We have Matt from Bloomington, Indiana, and then I think we'll get back to your program. Hey, Matt, you got a question for Kathy?
Yes, I do. In a typical classroom, of course, there's a range of skills and personalities. Some of the students are really outgoing. Some of them are really withdrawn. You have a real range of skills. So how do you prevent a project from being completely dominated by the most able and outgoing students?
Oh, I love that you asked this question. Well, remember we did the inventory of skills and talents? So that becomes part of your marker. I know my good colleague and friend Maureen Connolly in New York, what she did was they did the personal inventory and found that some students gravitated towards one area and one towards another in terms of skills, so she mixed them up. She partnered students who may not have an inclination to do one kind of activity with students who did, and they worked together to come up with a game plan so every student develops that skill set. So some of it is, who's really good at this, who needs help with that, but showing that everybody can cross-fertilize. So a student who may be quieter, who likes doing photography, helps a student who doesn't know that. So you keep, long as you keep identifying the skills and talents and creating learning opportunities for each, that's really great. And creating partnerships as students work together to develop those skills. The skill sets must be practiced in different ways. The student who's quieter, you do a workshop on how to make good phone calls, and the next thing you know, they're out and running. Service learning really does build these capacities with students and put them in new environments to test their abilities and to acquire new ones.
Well, thanks, Matt, for the call. And Kathy, because of the clock, I'm going to turn it back to you to move on with the rest of the program here.
All right, well, if we look at, there's 4 kinds of action: direct, indirect, advocacy, and research. And so as you look at action, keep these 4 in mind. Now, again, the food drive would fall into indirect, and that's a definite need in our environment. However, we must remember that direct service, I believe, affords the biggest bang for your buck. When kids can interact, they're concrete learners. They learn best by interfacing, by seeing what they do, by seeing dust under their nails, so to speak, or looking into somebody's face. If we only do indirect, we're actually sending a message that you can keep things at arm's length. So we want to mix these up. Students also resonate a great deal with advocacy, and research occurs in many of these action stages and sometimes stands alone. So there's many more of these examples on the websites I've referenced. For example, the GoToServiceLearning.org and ServiceLearning.org would be 2 great resources for that. Now, I want to mention a little bit about reflection. Reflection is so critical in the service learning process. It happens all throughout all the stages. It happens as students are reflecting on what the meaning of poverty is before they go to work on a Habitat for Humanity house. It happens right at that food bank when they're saying, is there a better way we could be stocking these shelves? It happens following the service where students say, gosh, I really would love to go back and interface more with that elder because I'm just beginning to learn how to reach someone who's got Alzheimer's. So reflection happens at all stages. It should be continuous, connected, and challenging, and include both the affective and the cognitive aspects. Now, one of my favorite reasons for doing reflection comes from a book, The Mixed-Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And in this novel, 2 kids run away from home and hide out at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And Claudia, age 12, at the end of the book, meets Mrs. Frankweiler, a quirky lady, and she asked her, she said, but Mrs. Frankweiler, I thought you should want to learn something new every day. We did even at the museum. And Mrs. Frankweiler surprises us with the answer. She says, and on the next slide, I don't agree with that. I think you should learn, of course, and some days you must learn a great deal. But you should also have days when you allow what is already in you to swell up inside of you until it touches everything and you can feel it inside you. If you never take time out to let that happen, then you just accumulate facts and they begin to rattle around inside you. You can make noise with them, but never really feel anything with them. It's hollow. This calls to that personalization part, that we want students to feel connected to the learning, that they feel filled up by what they've done, by what they've learned, and they see the relationship, and then can use the final stage of service learning. And I use the word final in a tongue-in-cheek way because there's no final aspect to service learning. Service learning often just leads one experience into the next. But in this 5th stage of called demonstration, students then take what they've done and they illuminate it. They illuminate their findings. The process of learning is articulated. They say, well, we learned through books. We learned through a field trip. I learned through writing a paper. I learned through an interview. I surveyed 300 people, and this is what we found out. And they take this body of knowledge, including their reflections, and they publicly communicate it. It could be as simple as a letter home to parents if they're young kids. It could be a display during a football game. So when people come into that football stadium, they see this visual of all these things these kids have been doing. It could be a newspaper article. It could be on a website. Demonstrating what they've done is important, and including sending a letter to their local legislator. This is important so that the legislators know that our tax dollars to the Learn and Serve America are going into a great purpose, which is turning kids into social change agents in our community to address even our most serious problems. Now, earlier, as we were starting, Marty and I were talking about how much we love books, and I promised her I would include 3 books that I thought would be so important to help students connect with service and learning, and these are 3 of my favorites. Any Small Goodness, A Story of the Barrio by Tony Johnston is a wonderful book about a boy who comes from a tight-knit Mexican-American family. The book has a great deal of Spanish in it, and even so much as a glossary in the back. And I love that about it because it has a real authentic voice of this community. And it's about a boy who has a support from his family, but a very challenging world he lives in. And when there's a situation of gang violence that is aimed at his family, thank goodness no one is hurt, Arturo, the protagonist and narrator of the story, has to decide, does he go towards goodness or go towards revenge? And the story of goodness that he goes towards is one of the most exquisite one, and it's perfect for the holiday season. So if you're looking for a great read, even for the last few weeks before the Christmas holiday, this would be the book to do. It's also great to give someone as a gift in their stocking for the holidays. Handbook for Boys by Walter Dean Myers is another wonderful book. Walter Dean Myers is one of the most prolific authors who writes much about African-American youth experience in America. His, though he doesn't just stick to America, his recent novel more recent novels about Fallujah and the war in Iraq. Handbook for Boys takes place in Harlem, and it's about a teenage boy who's done something stupid. He's gotten in a fight, and he's hurt a child, a peer of his, and so he's in the judicial system. In this community that he lives in Harlem, a barbershop owner has come forward to support some of these kids who've been in trouble. And so this young boy, this teenager in Handbook for Boys, opts for spending time at the barbershop, working after school every day for 6 months rather than going to the JV system. And in the barbershop, he hangs out with all the old guys. I like to call this my Tuesdays with Maury's for the junior set. Okay. Every chapter is a moralistic kind of lesson that these guys try to ram down this kid's throat, and he does his perfect job of resisting. It's a wonderful book. one that really touches me. And both the books, Any Small Goodness and Handbook for Boys, have been in my Strategies for Success with Literacy program. And kids have read it in Los Angeles by thousands, and they love the book. A new book that just came out this year is called Messed Up, and I just adore this book. It speaks to me in ways that few books have. It's about a kid who's living with his mother and her boyfriend, and when her mother ups and leaves with another boyfriend and moves away, he's left to live with this her mother's boyfriend, who luckily lets him live there. However, he falls very ill and passes away, and this boy is living alone. He's a kid who everybody's seen has messed up, and all he wants is to get his life straight. It is an exquisite story about how kids can be misjudged, misseen, and really shows what's at the heart of a young person's intentions. I think Messed Up is one of the most riveting books I read this summer, and I must confess I read 300 young adult and children's books this year. I did. Looking for the right books that I can share with the listeners today, and through my book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning.
Well, we appreciate that, and I just wanted to put in a plug for illustrated children's literature as wonderful vehicles for reflection. We've used them for years, and
please do,
and
Marty.
yeah, please. Think about that, even for older students to read books like The Ant and the Elephant or The Lorax or something. They do prompt good reflective activities. But we better move on quickly, Kathy, because our time's running out.
Okay, well, I have one more little summary slide here I just wanted to point out, is that when we meet the needs of youth, the summary of this would be that what we want to do is replace that sense of boredom, or why am I learning this, with active learning that builds on students' interests, skills, and talents. And as we're doing this, we're strengthening transferable skills by developing mutually respectful relationships with teachers, with community partners, with other peers that increase their competence and confidence. And by using these engaging strategies, we have created an environment where service learning can thrive, and students can meet their academic benchmarks. The outcomes are there. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of teachers have found this works all over the globe, and I know that your listeners can have hopefully taken some key information today that they'll take back to their schools and their teachers and get something started. The last slide I'd like to share with you is that for me, the purpose of life, and I would say education, is having a life of purpose, and that's what we're all about. The final slide shows a way for your listeners to contact me at my email address. I'd love to take your questions and be able to give you more resources, and to send you my list of quotes, and to thank all of you, each and every one of you, for tuning in and being part of this radio broadcast today.
Well, this really has been really interesting, and I can't believe we've already been through a full hour. It's really been valuable, and I'm so appreciative to Kathy for letting us know more about service learning and how it links with dropout prevention, and additionally about the role of literacy.
Yeah, I think our minds have been expanded, as they always are during this hour. I've always enjoyed this hour as my favorite hour of the month because I learned something new in an area I thought I knew something about service learning. I'm always learning something new, and appreciate what has happened. It's a great starting point for you listeners for developing further your service learning efforts to meet the needs of the youth at risk out there. So we want to remind our listeners that this radio webcast, like all our monthly programs, will be archived on our website, so you can go back and you can listen again. Recommend that your friends and your colleagues listen, and you can use the archive programs for professional development activities for an entire faculty or community group. But I must thank you, Kathy. Cathy Berger Kaye, you have given us some wonderful guidelines today, as always, and insights for developing service learning as a dropout prevention strategy. So thank you, Kathy, for being with us.
Thank you, Marty, and thanks for all the folks who called in, and I look forward to keeping this conversation going.
And Rebecca, we particularly appreciate your coming to Clemson today to do the program with me. Hey, why don't you tell our listeners what we plan to have on the website sponsored by the National Service Learning Partnership?
Sure, but I'd first like to again thank Kathy. It's really exciting to have her here and have the opportunity to talk with her more about service learning. It's been a lot of fun.
Rebecca. Thank you.
We're going to be posting a lot of additional resources on the National Service Learning Partnership's Innovation Spotlight Series, which is a part of their website. And this program is going to be part of that, will be archived. There's already an hour-long session on service learning and resilience there that was done at the last National Service Learning Conference. We're going to also add some more dropout prevention resources, some more information on using service learning as a dropout prevention strategy for students serving students. So we invite you to visit and stay tuned to the National Service Learning Partnership website to learn more about dropout prevention and service learning.
Okay. Well, this webcast will be available very shortly after the program. And it's also, I want to point out, downloadable for your iPod or MP3 players. Rebecca, did you know? After today, you're going to be on iTunes. You can subscribe to Solutions on iTunes, and I hope you'll do that. But tell all your friends, and you can get each month's program that way.
Wow.
It's a wonderful way to spend the holidays to listen to all the Solutions broadcasts. In January, we're going to have a program again on a regular Tuesday time slot, January 12th, 2010? Did you say 2010 or 2010? I don't know. But at 3:30 on January 12th, 2010, we'll be having Elaine Kraft. And our topic will be one of our effective strategies. In fact, one of our listeners wrote in and asked, what about the other 14 strategies? Well, one of them's career and technical education, and the rest can be found on our website. And that will be our topic for January. So mark your calendar for that. We'll be promoting this more in early January after the holidays. But we want to thank all of you for listening and participating today. Remember that we know why students are dropping out of school, and with research-based solutions, we can assure that all of our students graduate. Join us next time for more Solutions to the Dropout Crisis.